Trump's birthday should be fun. The last time people gathered to say, are you one, are you two, are you three, they were counting guilty verdicts.
Right. Donald Trump was back on Capitol Hill yesterday for the first time since his conviction, and he met with Republican lawmakers to discuss his campaign priorities. Multiple GOP sources say Trump used his time to air some of his grievances. He had thoughts about Taylor Swift, Nancy Pelosi, and the city of Milwaukee. Some lawmakers also telling CNN that during the meeting there weren't any members who voiced dissent with their party's presumptive Republican nominee.
It was a pep rally environment for President Trump.
I saw nothing but overwhelming support for President Trump.
I didn't sense any dissension, but, you know, I didn't catch everybody's response either.
He is the leader of the party, and he happens to be the guy who was chosen by the overwhelming majority of Republicans to be the nominee. Who are we to say no?
And joining me now to bring us inside the room is Republican Congressman from Florida, Cory Mills, who endorsed Trump during the presidential primary last year. Congressman, good morning.
Good morning.
So this seems to feel like it was a birthday party. Take us inside the room. What was it like?
Well, it was more than a birthday party. It was actually a coalescing around our Republican nominee. And, you know, we talked a lot about what the issues that we're facing. We talked about economics. We talked about, you know, the 41% who had voted in the Gallup poll regarding the fact that economics and inflation is what they're most concerned about. We talked about the border and key issues. But the thing that was really interesting is that he didn't talk just about his winning of the nomination or his winning of the White House. He talked about how does he help the rest of the GOP to win their races and to maintain the majority. And so this was really about him actually offering to try and help and support. And he even talked about a lot of the races in the past that he's gone out and done teletown halls for, that he's gone out and actually done rallies for. And so this wasn't just about, you know, President Trump. This was about how do we actually strengthen the party and also strengthen the nation.
Did he say that the city of Milwaukee, where the convention is going to be held, is a horrible city?
No, that is not at all what I've heard. No one else.
He didn't say that?
No,
you didn't hear him say that?
No, and actually Jake Sherman's report on this, if that was said, it must have been somewhere where me, Brian Mass, Byron Donalds, Jason Smith, like none of us heard that because we got asked it after the meeting, and I was like, I never heard this once, so I'm not understanding where this is even coming from. Okay. So,
well, CNN has confirmed that the word horrible was used, but I appreciate your
I'm sure he was talking about either something of the country or something that's going on, because I think that we can all agree that it's pretty horrible what we're seeing on our borders. It's pretty horrible what we're seeing with regards to elimination of the middle class, and so I think that it could have been a reference to that.
We have other uses for the word horrible. Okay.
Absolutely.
So, Congressman, we've been talking this morning about Mitch McConnell, who shook hands with the president after not speaking to him since the January 6th riot at the Capitol, and you know that image, also recalls the one where Kevin McCarthy went down, and that was just a couple weeks after the January 6th insurrection, and stood next to Donald Trump. I just want to remind you and our viewers of what both McCarthy and McConnell had to say at that time. Let's watch.
The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term.
Congressman, how did we get from there to here?
Well, I think that people are starting to realize the facts that came out. I mean, look, first off, I know you call it an insurrection. I still haven't had proof or any court that actually has deemed it as being such. But my whole thing is that I'm identifying this with one thing.
They tried to disrupt the results,
well, let's
counting
go ahead
of the
and
results and the certification of the election, and they were chanting, hang Mike Pence.
Let's talk about the idea of disruption. How many people were actually also found to actually not be MAGA supporters or America First or even Trump supporters that were wearing false flags that were actually in there? I mean, you had
we don't have any evidence of that, sir.
Actually, there is actually evidence multiple times. One of the biggest antagonists actually was a guy named Sean Patrick Riley, who actually was even indicted, but he was never actually gone before court. He was the same individual who was actually leading part of the Black Lives Matter and actually was an antagonist.
We're going down to a place that I do not want to go.
My whole point in this is just to explain that I still do not see where we can talk about how peaceful protests can be deemed, when we talk about Minnesota, we talk about Minneapolis, we talk about all these other areas, those are mostly peaceful protests. And yet people coming together without weaponry, without any type of,
I mean, there was blood smeared on the statues, and several Capitol police officers died in the wake of this.
There was things smeared on the Capitol.
I mean, they were spraying bear spray at cops. Like, how is that okay?
Spraying bear spray at cops. There's no one ever violating or ever attacking law enforcement. I'll be the first to go ahead and say that.
They were attacking law enforcement on January 6th.
I've also seen this in the BLM riots. I've also seen this in other areas. We can't sit here and say one was better than the other, but what I'll say is
sir,
this.
You are a member of Congress, and I am asking you about the attack on the building in which you serve. I'm not asking about. I understand we could sit here and we could make equivalency all day.
I'll be the first to tell you, law and order is law and order. I don't care who you vote for, who you don't vote for. If you actually are abusing law enforcement, if you're actually committing an act of crime, you should be charged to the fullest extent. I'll be the first to go ahead and say it. But there was a lot of people who has been pulled into this who wasn't even actually in the Capitol itself. So if we're talking about the J6 argument, I can actually argue where many people who are still detained don't even have charges that are being brought and levied against them. I mean, we're seeing that in Pinellas County's courthouse. We're seeing that in other areas. We're even seeing where members of Congress can't even go and visit to find out what's actually occurring and what's happening. So that's one thing in itself. Now, as far as McCarthy and McConnell's comments, I personally am not a big fan of the idea. I don't think that McConnell's been a great leader. That's why Rick Scott's actually trying to challenge him right now. I don't think that a man who can somehow find his wife.
Down, yeah.
Well, and you rightfully should. I mean, you're talking about a guy who somehow, he's the only member that I've ever seen, both in the Senate and the House, whose wives can get appointments under both a Democrat and Republican, president alike. So I'm not a big fan. President Trump has made it very clear that he did not look for violence in any way. If you read his tweets, if you read what he said, go home peacefully. That's not a person who's inciting violence. Let's talk about how Pelosi and Maxine Waters and others said, well, what about Maxine Waters, who was like, get in the face of people, start making more noise. Let's get out in the streets.
We're making equivalencies. I want to talk specifically about those events and what happened. And the reality on that day was the president did and said nothing for hours. In that time, as cops were being attacked.
Where did he say we should go storm the Capitol? Where did he say? He didn't. That's the whole point.
He urged his supporters at that speech that he gave to go to the Capitol, and then he told the Secret Service inside his car that he wanted to go to the Capitol too.
Wasn't it Nancy Pelosi who just admitted that her daughter was actually filming, that she didn't have adequate security, and that she should have done more, and that the responsibility was on her for the protection of the Capitol? That actually Capitol Police had reduced their forces, that National Guard was recommended.
So wait a second. Now, which is it? Does the Capitol need to be protected more because there was danger on that day, or was everything peaceful and fine?
I think that if we looked at 2016, the city of D.C. was burning, and we were worried about it then. Isn't that a prelude to what we've seen in coming elections? Aren't we seeing where this unprecedented thing is occurring, where every president has to come under impeachment, everyone has to be under scrutiny of lawfare, every single transition of power has to be so? Look, this is partially on the fact that there's a divided government that is continuing to play partisan rhetoric that's dangerous, and it's on both sides. When we're sitting here pointing fingers nonstop, when we're divided as an actual Congress, we're also divided as a nation. And I think that that's where what we need to be seeing right now is some type of healing, some type of coming together.
Do you think that the U.S. is still the greatest country in the world? Because
hands down.
President Trump continually says that we are a nation in decline. And the governor of Pennsylvania came out and said, hey, stop S-talking this country.
Well, look, we are a nation in decline in many ways. If you think about the $35.6 trillion in deficit. And I want to paint a really grim picture here. This is the first time in American history that we're going to pay more in interest on our national debt than we will in servicing our actual national defense. Not to mention, only 28 nations and empires in our world's history has ever seen 130% of GDP. Only one survived this, which is Japan. So we are a nation in decline. If you look at our open borders, if you look at the increased criminality, if you look at the divisions that we just discussed, I think that it's not something that we can argue to say we're better off now than we were 4 years ago.
Well, 4 years ago we were all in the midst of a pandemic. It's hard to feel better. Anyway, Congressman, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
And talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right, democracy.